And we're also very glad to have His Holiness Krishna Kshetra Swami with us. Most of you will know him. He is a scholar and a preacher, an academic, and he has been preaching in the academic field for quite a while, and his latest work is a documentary about the Srimad Bhagavatam. And if you have not seen it, it's on YouTube, and I heard the German subtitles for that film will be ready sometime this year, so you will be able to enjoy it even if you don't speak English so well. And we are pleased to welcome you here, Maharaj. You will be speaking about verse 433 of the Bhagavad-gītā As It Is, and I will hand over to you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much. I'm happy to again be visiting Deutschland, Berlin, in this way, auf diese Weise. And I'm happy to be with all of you. Thank you for joining. As we have just heard from, what is your full name? Karuna
Shakti Das.
Karuna Shakti Prabhu. We are going to dive into Bhagavad-gītā, wie sie ist, in the 4th chapter. So let's begin with some Mangala Charana. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitangscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatanine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad-gītā, Bhagavad-gītā As It Is, Bhagavad-gītā wie sie ist, Taka yakon jest. Chapter 4, verse number 33, in a discussion about, we can say there are two main themes. One is yajña, and the other is jñāna. And there's been, up to this verse, there's been a kind of overview of different sorts of yajña. And here in this verse, Krishna is going to kind of bring it to a conclusion. Parisamāpyate indicates completion. So here's how the verse goes in Sanskrit. Śreyān dravya-mayād yajñāt jñāna-yajñāḥ paran-tapa sarvam karmākhilaṁ pārtha jñāne parisamāpyate śreyān dravya-mayād yajñāt jñāna-yajñāḥ param-tapa sarvam karmākhilaṁ pārtha jñāne parisamāpyate śreyān dravya-mayād yajñāt jñāna-yajñāḥ param-tapa sarvam karmākhilaṁ pārtha jñāne parisamāpyate. Śreyān dravya-mayād yajñāt jñāna-yajñāḥ param-tapa sarvam karmākhilaṁ pārtha jñāne parisamāpyate. Okay, the word meanings, individual words. Śreyān, greater. Dravya-mayād, of material possessions. Yajñāt, then the sacrifice. Jñāna-yajñaḥ, sacrifice in knowledge. Paran-tapa, O chastiser of the enemy. Literally, O burner of the other. Paran means other, tapa. You burner of, scorcher of the enemy, sometimes translated. Sarvam, all. Karma, activities. Akhilam, in totality. Pārtha, O son of Pṛthā. Jñāne, in knowledge. And parisamāpyate, end. And then we have Srila Prabhupada's translation and his purport. Translation, O chastiser of the enemy, the sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than the mere sacrifice of material possessions. After all, O son of Pṛthā, all sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. Purport, the purpose of all sacrifices is to arrive at the status of complete knowledge, then to gain release from material miseries, and ultimately to engage in loving transcendental service to the Supreme Lord Krishna consciousness. Nonetheless, there is a mystery about all these different activities of sacrifice. We all like mysteries. And one should know this mystery. Sacrifices sometimes take different forms according to the particular faith of the performer. When one's faith reaches the stage of transcendental knowledge, the performer of sacrifices should be considered more advanced than those who simply sacrifice material possessions without such knowledge. For without attainment of knowledge, sacrifices remain on the material platform and bestow no spiritual benefit. No spiritual benefit. Real knowledge culminates in Krishna consciousness, the highest stage of transcendental knowledge. Without the elevation of knowledge, sacrifices are simply material activities. When, however, they are elevated to the level of transcendental knowledge, all such activities enter into the spiritual platform. Depending on differences in consciousness, sacrificial activities are sometimes called karma-kanda, fruitive activities, and sometimes jñāna-kanda, knowledge in the pursuit of truth. It is better when the end is knowledge, when the aim is knowledge. And so ends Srila Prabhupada's purport to this verse. And I might already now mention, this is coming just one verse before a very famous verse, one of the most famous in the Bhagavad-gītā, in which Krishna explains how to really understand all of this. Namely, approach the tattva-darshis, those who can see tattva, the truth. Okay, the verse again, the translation. O chastiser of the enemy, the sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than the mere sacrifice of material possessions. After all, O son of Pṛthā, all sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. First thing I want to do now is reflect a little on this word shreya. This is the first word in the verse, śreyān. It's a comparative. There's the word shri, and then there's shreya, is the comparative, better, and there's shreshta, which is best. And the word śreyān or shreya comes in different forms a few times in Bhagavad-gītā. So we did a little tricky Veda-based search, and there are more references, but here we have 12 of them. We don't have to go through all of them, but I think a general point to make about this is Krishna is often explaining among different options, one is better. And this is really how Arjuna is posing some of his most key questions also. What is better? Or sometimes rhetorically, how could it be better? Or it is better for me just to give up the battlefield. So let's see, we have in chapter 1, we have this verse. Nacha shreyo nupashyami hatva svajanam ahave nakangshe vijayam Krishna nacharajang sukanicha. I do not see how any good can come from killing my own kinsman. And here the word shreya is translated as good, which is a way of translating it. I don't see how any good or how it could be better from how there can be something better from killing my own kinsman in this battle, nor can I, my dear Krishna, desire any subsequent victory, kingdom, or happiness. So this sort of quandary that Arjuna finds himself in, which is the basis for the whole discussion of Bhagavad-gītā, the recognition, I don't know what is better for me. And so then, of course, famously Arjuna requests Krishna, chapter 2, verse 7, Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava prichami tang dharma samudacheta yat shreyasya nischitang bruhitang me shishyasteham shadimang tvang prapannam. And a translation. Now I am confused about my duty and I've lost all composure because of miserly weakness. Karpanya dosha. I have the fault of being a kripana. In this condition, I'm asking you to tell me for certain, yat shreyasya nischitam, tell me certainly, shreya, what is better? Or it's translated here, what is best for me? Now I'm your disciple, shishyasteham. And a soul surrendered unto you, please instruct me. So that's setting the scene of the Bhagavad-gītā. What is better? Please tell me what's the better of two options, because there are two options in the immediate situation of Arjuna, to fight or to not fight. So which is better? Later in the second chapter, Krishna urges, as we all know, Arjuna to fight. And again, he uses this word. Verse 31, Swadharmam apicha veksha navikampitam arhasi dharmyadi yudhat śreyān yat kshatriyasya navidyate. Shreyaha. Considering your specific duty as a kshatriya, you should know that there is no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles, and so there's no need for hesitation. Dharmyat, he, yudhat dharmhat, shreyaha, anyat, na, there is not something else, there's not another activity for you than the dharma of fighting. That is the better thing for you to do. Why? Because swadharmam, it's your dharma. And therefore you should not hesitate, vikampitam. You should not shake out. Don't get all shook up, we say in English slang. Don't be all shook. Don't be disturbed. Don't hesitate. Again, it's better, he's saying, for you to fight. In the third chapter, now it's again Arjuna asking what is better. Verse 2, Vyamishrene vavakyena buddhim mohayasivame tadekam vadanischitya yena shreyaha aham apnuyam. My intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Vyamishrena means mixed up, equivocal instructions. My intelligence, buddhi, mohayasi. You have caused my intelligence to be bewildered. He's actually accusing Krishna of confusing him. Mohayasi, you've caused confusion. Tat ekam vada, tell me one thing. Don't tell me two different things. Tell me one thing. Nischitya, definitely. Yena śreyān, by which the better is gained. I will gain the better, the benefit. And there's more. There's more śreyān. Again in chapter 3, verse number 11. The demigods, being pleased by sacrifice, will also please you. And thus, by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. Now here the word śreyān is benediction in the word for word. Paraspara bhavayantaha, pleasing one another, benediction, śreyān will occur, I guess we can say. You will achieve śreyān. Param-tapa, the highest benefit. So that's always the aim. The goal is what is better, and we're sort of this is built into all of us. We can say this, looking for what's the better situation, the better solution, the better choice. There's a whole area of social psychology called rational choice theory, how we make choices. We try to be rational, but often we're not, perhaps more often not. Let's see, another one in chapter 3. Is verse 35. Yes, śreyān svadharma viguna, paradharmat svanushthitat, svadharme nidanam śreyāh, paradharmo bhayavaha. Here the word comes twice, one in the comparative form, śreyān, better, śreyāt, and then śreyāh as still as better. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, even though with fault, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. So it's better to do your duty even if you do it more with mistakes, in a faulty way. And in general, it's better to do our duty than another's duty. It's often been said, this is one of the expressions of Krishna's conservatism in Bhagavad-gītā. Krishna is being socially conservative here. He's saying, stay in your position. Whatever your duty is, just do it and accept it. And we may think, does that really apply all the time? Well, of course, at the end of the Gita, what is Krishna going to say? Sarva dharma pratyaja. Na dharmam, na dharmam, shruti gana niruktam kilakuru, as Raghunath Das Goswami says. Don't do good dharma, don't do bad dharma. Just be absorbed in Krishna. Let's see, I think we had one or two more. Chapter 5, let's see, what is this? Arjuna uvacha sannyasam karmanam Krishna punar yogam cha sangshasi yat shreya etayorekam tanme bruhi sunischitam. Again, this is the beginning of chapter 5, and again, Krishna is expressing confusion, and he's a little bit complaining, I would say. Tell me something clearly. Tell me one thing. Tat shreya etayoho. Of these two, ekam, tell me which one is better. And tell me sunischitam, tell me definitely. Please tell me definitely, I need to know. Arjuna said, "O Krishna, first of all, you asked me to renounce work. And then again, you recommend work with devotion. Now, will you kindly tell me definitely which of the two is more beneficial?" What's more beneficial, what's better? And so now, coming back to chapter 4, verse 33, Krishna's telling Arjuna what is better in terms of different kinds of sacrifice. Basically, two categories. He's kind of summing up here. What did we have prior to this? We had all sorts of sacrifices, sacrificing the sense objects into the senses. We had sacrificing of the ingoing breath into the outgoing breath, and the outgoing breath into the ingoing breath. In other words, pranayama. We had, let's see, what did we have? Verse 31. Well, that's summarizing more. Without sacrifice, one can never be happy in this planet. Before this, know the meaning of sacrifice. Okay, what else? Okay, there's a list. Verse 28, we have 3 or 4, at least 4 kinds. Dravya-mayād, tapo-yajñāḥ, yoga-yajñāḥ, tatapare, svadhyaya-jñāna-yajñāscha, yatayaha, sangshita vrataha. Having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions. That's what is dravya-mayād. Dravya means things, objects, material goods, wealth. Dravya-mayād. Some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, tapo-yajñāḥ, by practicing the yoga of 8-fold mysticism, yoga-yajñāḥ, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge, svadhyaya-jñāna-yajñāḥ. So what's happening here? Krishna is, in a sense, he's putting all sorts of, let us say, broadly speaking, intentional activity for some kind of result, for some kind of purpose, intentional practices into this one category called yajña. Why? Because the Bhagavad-gītā in general, Krishna speaking Bhagavad-gītā, is in many ways sort of pointing back to we may want to call it the classical, or we may want to say karma-kanda, ritual system of the Veda. Because it's within that context, well, one reason we can say is it's within that context that the word karma has meaning. Karma originally meant ritual action. It comes to mean any action, and that's very much what the Gita is about. It's much of the Gita is about the problem of being implicated by action, by any kind of action. But its more sort of specific meaning is ritual action. Now, this is something that we don't relate to much in modern life. And especially this word sacrifice. Actually, if we talk about sacrifice nowadays, either it makes people cringe, or it makes people scream, or it makes people just shake their head and say, what sort of archaic religion are you talking about? And the sort of associations we have with the word sacrifice are generally something quite negative and often associated with blood. We think of animal sacrifice. And indeed, animal sacrifice was going on in the Vedic system, in the Vedic practice. And some of the descriptions of animal sacrifice involved or prescribed the killing of quite large numbers of animals. This is controversial. Some argue that no, this is not at all what it means. But it's kind of hard to argue that what's not known is how many people were actually doing these sacrifices. That's just not known, because all we have is the texts. We don't have any, census, no surveys, but sacrifices were going on. And it's even mentioned, even if we say, well, those animal sacrifices, at some point they became replaced with substitutes. And that's true, that's there, that fruit could be offered instead, or grains, and so on. But it's interesting that there's a passage in one Vedic text called the Shatapatha Brahmana, which goes into extreme detail about the Vedic sacrificial rituals and what they were all about and what their origins, specific procedures, what the origins were. And it says there in one passage that whether it's killing of an animal or it's offering of a grain, that is also killing. no matter what is done, however sacrifice is done, it is killing. That's what it says. Ducks. We have ducks outside here now. Well, I don't want to go too much into this, but the study of religion has been very much, not so much nowadays, but in earlier decades, a century ago and more, has been very much about the subject of sacrifice, because it was noticed that this is something all different religions have in common, is some form of sacrifice. But it's also associated with, it's used in everyday language. We sacrifice time for something, or parents sacrifice their energy, their time, themselves for their children, for example. Whenever there's a war and soldiers are killed, then one speaks of the sacrifice of human life for what is supposed to be some higher purpose for the country, and so on. So there's all these different associations with sacrifice. And coming back to the Gita, Krishna he wants to stretch the meaning of sacrifice. Not in an artificial way, but he wants to show the real meaning of sacrifice. The real meaning, of course, broadly speaking, we may say sacrifice is about giving up something. And of course, the whole process of sacrifice that Krishna is leading us to in the Bhagavad-gītā is giving up our material misconceptions of ourselves and of the world, so that we can give ourselves, our real selves, to the Lord, to make the perfect sacrifice, which is a sacrifice in which there is no loss, there is only gain. Rajavidya Rajaguhyam Pavitram idam uttamam pratyakshavagaman dharmyam susukam kartam avyayam. There's only joy in this in this practice, in this sacrifice. So Krishna's here making a distinction of two categories. One is dravya-mayād and the other is jñāna-yajñaḥ. And now we might ask, well, what could that possibly mean, jñāna-yajñaḥ? Does it mean giving up knowledge? I can understand giving up things. I'm throwing grains in the fire, or I'm somehow consuming things, or giving to Brahman. This is described here. But what does that mean, jñāna-yajñaḥ? Well, we got one hint from this verse we just read, verse 28, in the third line, svadhyaya jnana yajñascha. Svadhyaya, literally one's own meditation. It comes to mean recitation, hopefully with meditation, of one's own scripture, one's own, traditionally one had a portion of the Veda for recitation, which one memorized. And eventually there were different groups of Brahmins whose family name showed how much they knew of the Veda. So Vedis and Dvivedis and Trivedi and Chaturvedi or Chobe. Chaturvedi becomes Chobe in Mathura, I have heard. The Chobes are supposed to know 4 Vedas. How many Chobes you'll find who know 4 Vedas today, I don't know. But Svadhyaya Jnana, by this recitation, one is, you can say, sacrificing time and some effort and some attention in that practice of meditation on Veda. So that's one way of understanding jñāna-yajñaḥ. Here in our verse, jñāna-yajñaḥ, I think how to understand it is in the context of what the result is that's being told here. What is the result of doing jñāna-yajñaḥ? The result is karmākhilaṁ, sarvam akhilam karma parisamāpyate. It will be finished. Karma and reaction of karma will come to an end. Which means the whole problem of material existence is coming to an end. And that's what we want. That's what we're looking for. So jnana is going to be very much celebrated. But let's think now more about this word jnana or jñāna. In Bengali, modern Bengali and Hindi, we say jnana, but it's more classically jñāna. One interesting thing about this word, I find, is that it has a linguistic relationship to the Latin word gnosis, or sorry, the Greek word gnosis. Jnana, gnosis. And there was a kind of movement that started in the 1st century of the Common Era in the ancient Western world, which came to be called Gnosticism. And the Gnostics were interested in, guess what? They were interested in knowledge. They were interested in understanding spiritual knowledge, and the emphasis seems to have been on a personal understanding, a personal realization. We may want to call it self-realization. And unfortunately, I would say, this came into conflict with the Christian church. The Christian church saw this movement, this vaguely popular movement, but it was also amongst various philosophers, or maybe mainly philosophers. They saw it as a danger. Why was it a danger? Because they felt it would draw people away from the church, from the ritualism of the church, from, we all get together, we hear some verses, some mantras, we have a ritual, we're all doing the same thing together. It's all about togetherness. It's not about thinking, who am I? So they saw it as a danger, and therefore it was declared a heresy. It was condemned. Gnosticism was condemned as a heresy, as something to be stopped, as a danger. Well, here, Krishna in Bhagavad-gītā is being very heretical. He's God himself, and he's being heretical. Figure that out. And he's saying between ritual and jnana, jnana is more important. It's better. And why is it better? He says in the verse, because by knowledge, you'll be able to remove ultimately the real problem. You're going to be able to solve your problem. What is your problem? Your problem is you are a conditioned soul. You are bound in this world by your karma, by your action. And so in the end of this chapter, Krishna is going to urge Arjuna to use knowledge as a weapon. Tasmat ajnana sambhutam hritstam jnana asinatmana chitvainam chitva enam sangshayam yogam atishto tishta paran-tapa. Therefore, the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed, cut through by the weapon of knowledge. Armed with yoga, O Bharata, stand and fight. So he's going to turn it back. Knowledge is going to be a tool, but then what is going to be the general activity that you do? It's going to be yoga. And that will lead into the next chapters. 5th chapter, 6th chapter is very much about meditational yoga. In the 5th chapter, we have some glorification of jnana. Chapter 16, jnānena tu tada jnanam, yesham nashitam atmana, tesham adityavat jnanam prakashayati tat param. When, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, then his knowledge reveals everything as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. So knowledge is very much associated with light, and it has this association also with destroying darkness. Where there is darkness, there's no light. Where there's light, there's no darkness. So where there is jnana, there is no ajnana. And I think this can take us back to now we had gnosis, and there's also the English word ignorance. Ignorance. To ignore is to act in a way that some object or some reality is not there. To ignore a person, to ignore a fact, some reality, some truth. And that is ignorance. So it suggests also a kind of intentionality. Prabhupada used to say, well, how many times he would speak about fools and rascals. And one time he said, fool means rascal. If someone is a fool, it's because they're a rascal. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a fool. And a rascal means someone is intentionally ignorant. So ignorance is to ignore the truth. So the truth is, the truth is everywhere we look. Everywhere we look, it's all around us. It's in us. We are part of the truth. We are part and parcel. We are eternal bits of truth, bits of light, sparks of fire. And to do anything which leads toward that realization, that we can say is jñāna-yajñaḥ. Now, more broadly, we might want to also think of jnana, although Prabhupada almost always translates it as knowledge. The sense in which he's speaking of knowledge would suggest we can also use the English word wisdom, or in German, Weisheit. Now, this can be confusing because also there's the word vijnana, which Prabhupada would sometimes translate as wisdom or applied knowledge. If we think of the two of them together, jnana and vijnana, jnana vijnana sahitam yad yatva mokshase ashubhat. Krishna says, I'm going to tell you about both of these, by which ashubhat, you'll be freed from all inauspiciousness. So what we're looking for certainly is wisdom. That's what we're after. And that to pursue wisdom is the whole human enterprise. To not just carry around some knowledge, but to have a knowledge by which we act and by which we illuminate ourselves and others. Nobody wants to be in darkness. We want to be illuminated by knowledge. And this reminds me of a story we were just discussing earlier today, about how knowledge was lost to the Brahmins in the previous age. And this story leads to explaining how it is that Srila Vyasadeva appeared. Gautama Rishi, a great sage in the previous age, was very concerned because there was a drought. There was no rain for a long time, and the whole land was suffering. And what could be done? So Gautama thought, well, let me perform austerity and draw the attention of Lord Brahma and ask for a boon, a blessing. So that's what he did. He performed a great austerity. I mean, there was already so much austerity. There was practically nothing to eat. People were starving. Eventually, Lord Brahma approached him and expressed his satisfaction in Gautama's austerity, and he asked, or he offered a boon. And the boon that Gautama Rishi asked for was the blessing that he would have sufficient grain that he could go on feeding all the Brahmins in the land. Because if the Brahmins were fed, then they would be satisfied. If they're satisfied, then again, the balance of nature will come about. And again, there will be rain and everyone will be happy. So he got this blessing, and then he invited all the Brahmins, and the Brahmins came and stayed with him. Apparently he had a big ashram. I don't know, 2-story, 3-story building, skyscraper, Gautama Rishi ashram. In any case, and he fed them day after day, and they stayed with him, and everything was very nice. And because the Brahmins were pleased, sure enough, the Devas came back into a proper understanding of things to bless the land. And so Indra blessed the land with rain. And again, everything was back to normal. And so the Brahmins were eager to get back to their homes, back to their families, back to their communities, and to do their services for their communities. But it would not have been proper for them to simply say, okay, Gautama Rishi, Prabhu, thank you very much, we're leaving now. They would need to get his permission to leave. Otherwise, it would be considered a great offense. And so they asked him for permission. And Gautama Rishi said, if you can just stay a few more days, like this is what Advaita Acharya did in the case of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. After he took sannyas, he came to his home, and they had a festival for several days. And then Mahaprabhu wanted to leave to follow his mother's order to go to Puri. And Advaita Acharya said, you can go, but stay a couple more days. Okay, so a couple more days, 3 more days. So Gautama Rishi was saying, stay a few more. Okay, so they stayed. Again, they asked, can we please have your blessings to go? We need to get back home. No, please, just stay a couple more days. Because Gautama was enjoying their company, and he was maybe a little proud that he could provide for them in this way. So this was going on day after day, and the Brahmins were getting nervous. So they had a meeting amongst themselves without Gautama Rishi. They had a meeting, and they made a conspiracy. Nowadays, everyone talks about conspiracies. The original conspiracy was done by Brahmins. And what they did was they created a kind of magical cow, illusory cow, and they placed it right nearby to Gautama Rishi. And Gautama went to this cow, intrigued by the cow, and he touched the cow. And as soon as he touched the cow dropped dead. And the Brahmins saw this, and they exclaimed, "Aho, Bhatta, aho, Bhatta." Or probably not that. They probably said, "Dick, Dick," which is a kind of exclamation, negative exclamation. What a terrible thing. How can we possibly stay in the ashram of a cow killer? Let us go. And so they all up and left immediately, which was their purpose. Now they had an excuse. They didn't have to have his blessings. They had an excuse to go, so they went. After they went, Gautama Rishi He's a rishi. He sees how things are. He was able to penetrate through the whole scheme to understand what happened. And at that point, he became angry. Rishis, as powerful as they are, they're actually they're like super powerful. They're more powerful than the demigods in many ways. And they sometimes have short tempers. But it's also said that it's the power of the rishis by which this whole universe is maintained, in fact. In any case, Gautama Rishi became angry and cursed the Brahmins. And what was his curse? His curse was that they would lose all their Vedic knowledge. And what's a Brahmin without his Vedic knowledge? And so, in desperation, they went to the Lord. They all prayed to the Lord, please help us. And the Lord heard their prayer, and the Lord agreed to appear, Lord Narayan. And it's not every Kali Yuga that Srila Vyasadeva is Lord Narayan. This particular Kali Yuga, this is explained by Srila Jiva Goswami, this particular Kali Yuga is in many ways special. One of them is, of course, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appears. The other is that Srila Vyasadeva is Dvaipayana Vyasa, and he is none other than Narayana himself. And therefore, his writings, in particular, his writing of the Śrīmad Bhagavatam is very special. And so we have jñāna-yajñaḥ in the form of reading what Srila Vyasadeva has given us. That is a very major substance of our jñāna-yajñaḥ. Hare Krishna. Okay, I think I should stop there, actually. Stay tuned for more action in the next verse coming up. Whoever will be lecturing is going to really, it's the punchline of the chapter, you could say. It's okay, I've got all this, I should do this yajna, that yajna. But how do I know which yajna to do? Tatvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. That's how we know. Good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
Hare
very
Krishna.
much, Maharaj. And I think we have maybe a bit of time for one or two questions. I don't see anything yet in the chat box, so be quick and unmute yourselves if you have a question. There is a microphone icon in the bottom left corner of your screen. And maybe if you have a question, then you can just unmute yourselves and speak right away.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Here's Jalangita Vidasi. I
Hare
would
Krishna.
like to pay my most humble obeisances to you and to all the Vaishnavas. I would like to ask you, in the context of the first sentence of the purport, how can we understand what Rupa Goswami said in Nectar of Devotion, that pure devotional service brings immediate relief from all kinds of material distress? Because it seems that according to this purport, you can be free from material suffering before you start pure devotional service. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. The purport says, the purpose of all sacrifice is to arrive at the status of complete knowledge. Oh yeah, he's giving 3 stages. So first is complete knowledge, then to gain release from material miseries, and ultimately to engage in loving transcendental service to the Supreme Lord. Shri Krishna. And you're speaking about these, what is it, 6 characteristics, 5 characteristics, 6.
Yes. And the first one is this kleshagni.
Kleshagni subhada moksha lagudakrit. Yes. The word gni, from gna, destruction, just means literally, in a general sense, destruction of klesha, but it doesn't give us a time frame. It may then elaborate on that, because it's then explained. This is within Vaidhi Bhakti, this is possible. So you're saying, why is it that in this purport, it seems like even before devotional service? I would say because all of these are overlapping. It's not a cut and dried thing. The process of sacrifice, it's said elsewhere, cannot be done. No kind of sacrifice can be done without some bhakti, without some engagement in bhakti. None of the processes, yoga, jnana, karma, jnana, yoga, nothing can be done without some presence of bhakti. And so there is a progression and there's a sense of immediacy. I would put it like that. Immediate, the word immediate can have various senses. We kind of expect it to mean immediate within 1 second. And of course, that is possible. We understand Prabhupada would say that. You can reach perfection in 1 second. But immediate can also mean within this lifetime. Considering that we are eternal and we have how many lifetimes. So immediate can also mean within this lifetime. Most generally, Srila Prabhupada would speak about the gradual nature of devotional service. Gradually, we progress in devotional service. And we also understand that also for devotees, that suffering does not just disappear. But we understand that when it does come, when we suffer, we try to see that through the lens of bhakti, to see that Krishna is behind it. And that is very difficult to understand unless we have at least a basic idea that Krishna wants well, he means well for us, that when we are giving ourselves to Krishna, Krishna is now caring for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what comes to my mind.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, actually, 2 in the waiting queue. And we'll start with Christoph at Alii and others. That he is not alone. And I can see that he has just requested to ask a question. And after that, we will have Krishna Kata Prabhu. And if anyone else has a question, you can either type into the chat box or raise your hand with the raise hand feature. So next question comes now.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj, for this nice lecture. Guru Maharaj, my question would be to the point knowledge, that actually we hear knowledge is very important. We should cultivate transcendental knowledge. But on the other side, one point, bhakti is not depending on knowledge. Bhakti is not depending on knowledge, or when we hear that knowledge can reveal to our heart from Krishna. And we hear also some stories. At least I was reading something about Shankaracharya and a disciple from him. He was not very, he had not so much knowledge, but he was serving nicely his guru. And then on one point, his guru asked him, please reveal some knowledge, and he revealed knowledge, but he was not so really learned. And how can we understand this?
Okay, that's that's Shankaracharya, who's all about knowledge. He's not about bhakti. That was not his mission. Although he did, this is also Jiva Goswami says that he wrote, or he's identified as the author of a Govindashtakam in praise of Govinda, which alludes to pastimes in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Anyway, yeah, it's sort of a matter of emphasis. Sometimes, like here in the 4th chapter, we're in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad-gītā. Krishna is, he's sort of working his way toward pure bhakti, and at the same time, it's all understood to be bhakti from page 1. In chapter 4, though, the main emphasis is on jnana as a tool, again, as a weapon for helping to get to the point where one can eventually do pure devotional service. Again, it's this first verse of the purport. We want to get to the status of complete knowledge, then release from material miseries, ultimately engage in loving devotional service. And pure devotional service does not depend on knowledge, but we need help. We need all the help we can get to reach the point where we are fully willing, you can say, to do pure devotional service. And for that purpose, we do jñāna-yajñaḥ. Now, beyond that, we can also say one who is engaged in pure devotional service is full of knowledge. That person knows, I am eternal servant of Krishna. That person knows, I am not this material body. That person knows the difference between spirit and matter, and knows and has the wisdom of how to engage matter in Krishna's service. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Maharaj. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, and after these 2 brief questions, hopefully, we will conclude this evening. And the next one is by Krishna Kshetra Prabhu. Just for your information, he has just recently, this Sunday on Gora Purnima, been offered first initiation. Congratulations on that. You can
Hare
speak.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thanks for the lecture, Maharaj, and also thanks for your time. Maharaj, when you were discussing the term Shreyas, and you came across this verse 335, and it just caught my attention. The verse says it is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than others' duties perfectly understood. As you said, this was kind of conservative and so on. But for me, it was, I could not understand the statement. this verse, and I was just trying to avoid this since like past 5 to 6 years. Like, I see, like, okay, just try to ignore. I mean, it's kind of you can. I mean, you cannot understand from one perspective. Like, okay, why is it like, okay, if I can perform one duty perfectly, why shouldn't I do it? But on the other side, I cannot challenge the statement of Shastras or even the statements of Krishna. And when I had some realizations, Maharaj, in the past few years, for example, after due to this corona and so on, and in India, for example, I think this statement is more or less has to do with the varnashrama and that's thing. And if you see, for example, a barber, Maharaj, in India, like a barber's son, his profession is already fixed. When he's born, he's already fixed. So he need not have to worry about what he has to do in the future and so on.
Yeah.
His profession is fixed and he can peacefully go on. He can pass through his childhood and so on. And then at the right time, he'll take up the profession. So, and then but then there's the other thing, like the people from other sections are coming into this profession, and now this guy is kind of jobless now. And now
Right.
if we just look at this statement, like, and if I see the destruction in the course of performing one's duty is better than engaging in another's duty, and the people from other sections have entered into their profession, and this guy is jobless, and now, for instance, he cannot progress well in his next stages in life, because I mean, our life is kind of temporary on this world. So one has to go through the phases, like after childhood, one has to get the career, get married, or so on, and enter into the vanaprastha, just go on, like, and now it's kind of obstruction to his life. And there's a disturbance in the social order, and it's completely chaos in the society.
Yeah.
And then and then I started to appreciate this verse that, okay, so far I couldn't understand, but this statement has so much meaning to it, and we cannot put this verse into a particular context or in a particular frame of time, like, okay, these instructions are not valid for this age, and so on and so on. And yeah,
Right.
on the other side, it kept me appreciate this verse, like, okay, it's such a beautiful thing, verse. I mean, it doesn't mean that if I cannot understand, it doesn't mean that it's not relevant or something. So I just want
Yes.
to throw some light on this, Maharaj, whether is it the right thing? I mean, is it the right way to understand this word, just from my realizations?
Yes, I think you've given it a good explanation. I would just add another side of it is that there's a kind of basic idea in the notion of duty that it's a device, we can say, of higher order by which we can become detached from the ever-changing circumstances. In other words, a duty is something which is, it's the same. It's something which stays the same. And circumstances are always changing and challenging our, ability to do our service or whatever. So the notion of the sense of duty helps us to overcome shifting material circumstances, to go on doing our duty, and in this way transcending the circumstances. I always remember when I was a kid, my father told me that he was kind of reprimanded by his immediate superior. He was an officer in the military, and I guess one day my father had stayed back from his office, and the next day he went into his office, and his superior said, "Where were you?" And my father said, "Well, I had a headache, so I didn't come in." And the superior said, "Half the world's work is done with a headache." which I'm remembering personally right now because as I speak, I have a headache since the last 2 days. So anyway, so it's a way of helping us to transcend, to transcend circumstances. We have a duty and we can say, okay, whatever is going on, this is what I have to do. So, but your point is also very nice. It's, you know, it is about social stability and what are you going to do about people become unemployed and so on. Yes, very good.
So we have one more question in line. Is that okay for you, Maharaj?
Yes,
Okay.
that's fine.
Stira Lalita Mataji would like to ask a question. You can speak.
Thank you. Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. I'm very sorry you have a headache.
Thank you. It's okay. I'll survive.
Well, in your
I don't know how coherent my talk was today because
no, it was wonderful class, and as usual, your line of topic and following the Shreya word through all the verses. I mean, for me, it's mind blowing every time I listen to the class very much. As I don't have really a knowledge, even if I understand something, I forget. I have to listen to it again and again. I will keep it short. I said, if I've understood you properly, that there are different types of sacrifices, and I was thinking, is that my understanding actually is that what is sacrificed for one person, it isn't for the other. And how do we know? This is the how question. So how do we know what we personally need to sacrifice in order to please the Lord and ultimately be free from reactions of our personal karma? Or does that comes with jñāna?
Well, that's answered in the next verse. Tatvidhi pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya.
If I would just understand that.
But that's the solution. Ultimately, we have to have some guidance, and it's personalist philosophy. Krishna's guidance to Arjuna, in a sense, it's for all of us, and in some sense, much of it is very general. And that's why we need someone or more than one, because Krishna says tattvadarshina, plural. There can be several gurus who guide us. So that's going to be sort of the conclusion of this whole section, this whole about yajna. Yeah, that's how we do it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I wish you to your headache to go away.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. I shouldn't have said anything about that. Anyway, maybe the prayers and blessings of the Vaishnavas, it'll go away.
It's all right to share.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, and thank you to all of you who have joined us and who have asked questions and made this lecture even more interesting with your questions and enriched this event. Just a brief reminder, we have just recently shifted our clocks, so if you want to join us next week, you have to deduct 1 hour 24 minutes from the time you're seeing now on your clock, and that will be the time at which we will be starting next week. So thank you very much to all of you. Hare Krishna, and I wish you a good evening and a good night. Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Goti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Berlin Yatra ki jai. Gaur Premanande. Hari Bol.
Haribol, Guru Maharaj ki jai.
Jai.